Society members will be fortunate to have read the recent issue of Unfiltered, our monthly magazine, where we read about the remarkable life and work of Sir Geoff Palmer. Now, Sir Geoff travelled at the age of 14 from Jamaica to the UK and was originally designated as being educationally subnormal, which is unbelievable in this day and age. But he has had an incredible life and career, and he joins me right now. He's gone on to set up the world-renowned International Centre for Brewing and Distilling at Heriot-Watt University. He's also known for his groundbreaking work on barley abrasion, also his human rights activism, and he's an ambassador for the Rabbie Burns World Federation. He's joining me on a screen, and it's lovely to have him here. Sir Geoff Palmer, how are you?
I'm very well.
It's good to have you here.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you loud and clear. You're looking great, with your braces on there as well.
Well, thank you. It's the Palmer tartan.
Is it? Great. Quite right, too. And have you got a glass of something?
Well, yes, I've got it. It's a very large one.
A large one. That's the best one. The larger, the better. Sir Geoff, tell us a bit about Burns and your connection with him.
Well, when my mum left Jamaica in 1951 to come to the UK, she left me with her sisters, and these sisters were very religious. The two things I had to do. I had to go to church 3 times every Sunday. And I also had to go to school. And that was it. And of course, when I think it was one week, we had a teacher called Mrs. Davidson. And it was about 1952, and she was teaching us to sing, and she started to teach us these songs, and I'd never heard of them, nobody had, and they were a chap called Rabbie Burns, she said. And, I thought, well, you're sitting, I was about 12. And then she started. And one was, my love is like a red, red rose.
Yes.
And the other one was Coming Through the Rye. And I loved them. I thought they were wonderful because they were about girls.
Yeah, that's right.
And so when I went home that day, my aunts, they always ask you, what did you do today, boy, at school?
Yeah.
And I said, well, we sang some songs, Auntie, and do you want me to sing them? And they said, oh, of course. And I started. And when I was, coming through the rye, and my love is like a red, red rose, blooming in June, and and they caught me by the shoulder and said, "What was that?" And I said, these were the songs I was taught today."
And did they disapprove?
Oh, they disapproved. They said, we're going to the teacher to tell us those naughty songs. You're a wee boy. You're a boy. You're not supposed to be singing stuff like that.
So they understood these songs' real meaning, and you were kind of enjoying the words, I take it.
Well, that's right. I didn't. I knew there was something about love and etc., but I did not know they had any implications. They did. And they thought I was at 12, in Jamaica. When you're a wee boy, you're not supposed to behave like a man. You're wearing short trousers. And therefore, my introduction to Burns was, it was fine. It was one where my aunts thought that sort of mature stuff wasn't for little boys. And I've never forgotten that. But I just thought it was funny.
Yeah, I'm sure.
In a sense.
And I suppose ever so slightly rebellious at the time as well.
Well, yeah, I loved it in a sense that, if you're 12 and still wearing short trousers, in Jamaica, my aunts used to say, there are no men in this house, and there wasn't, just myself and my brother,
Hmm.
and we had to wear short trousers and socks and shoes when we're going to school and church.
And behave
You know, you,
yourselves. And,
and behave yourself. That's it.
and
Behave
not
yourself. Behave yourself like a little boy.
yes, and not sing songs about love and romance and sex.
Oh no. I mean, God, this is just bad news.
Yeah,
This was I went to church 3 times every Sunday, and she would have reported me to the minister of the church that I need some attention.
I see. That's the thing. As I was speaking to Tam Dean Byrne earlier on, he was a wild man, Burns, and a lot of children growing up in Scotland and learning these songs and poems don't necessarily connect with that until they're a bit older. But you obviously, came across this at a young age as well. Has Burns been a constant for you in your life since then?
Well, yes, he has, in a sense that when I left Jamaica and came to the UK, and I arrived in Scotland in 1964
Mm-hmm.
for an interview after being rejected by a very famous politician who told me I should go home and grow bananas.
Unbelievable.
I did point out to him it was difficult to grow bananas in the area of London where I lived. And I was taken by a wonderful woman called Professor Anna MacLeod, and she worked at the Heriot-Watt College then, it wasn't a university. And she took me for a PhD, and the PhD was joint between Edinburgh University and Heriot-Watt. And during my period, during the PhD, I got to know about Robert Burns. I attended a few Burns suppers,
Mm-hmm.
and I then realized it was the same guy I was singing about when I was 12.
Right.
But it had greater significance because I realized, and I start reading about it, that Burns knew a lot about Jamaica.
Mm.
It's one of the countries he knew a lot about.
Now, I'd like to ask you this, as someone that's travelled from Jamaica to the UK. How do you reconcile Burns's potential job on a plantation with the fact that he wrote "A Man's a Man for All That" and "A Slave's Lament," for example?
Well, again, I think it's like it's with Burns. You have to take him in terms of dates.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people don't do that.
Mm-hmm.
And going to Jamaica was 1786. The Slave's Lament and A Man's a Man. Slave's Lament, I think, is 1792, and A Man's a Man is about 1795. So here we have Burns as a young man. He knew exactly what was going on during slavery. And therefore, if you read your Burns carefully, you will see that he knew what the political activities of the time.
Mm-hmm.
And 1786, it was about going to the Caribbean to better yourself, to go there, make some money, come back and marry up, as some of them did.
Mm-hmm.
And he therefore decided, he was going to try that. Of course, he didn't go.
No.
But the point is that he wanting to go was almost normal.
Mm-hmm.
And he also was going to take one of his young ladies with him. He was going to take Highland Mary.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, she went to Greenock and he didn't turn up. I went to Greenock to give a talk not long ago, and the school children, as soon as I start talking about Burns and about going to Jamaica, a little girl stuck her hand up and said, "You're right, sir, Island Mary's buried up the road."
Right.
So, you know, he didn't go to Jamaica, but he also, about the same period, you know, but 1784, he was writing about Henry Dundas.
Mm-hmm.
And Henry Dundas, I've done a lot of work on him recently.
Yes, yeah.
To do with his statue in the middle of Edinburgh.
Mm-hmm.
We've changed his plaque, changed the narrative, put on it that he gradually abolished the slave trade. Now, Dundas is more perceptive than people give him credit for, because Burns was writing in about 1784 about Dundas, and he called him Slee Dundas. And of course, Henry Dundas was impeached in 1806, the last politician in Britain to be impeached.
So
Burns spotted.
Yes, he may have played a role in that in some way.
Well, Burns spotted from 1784 that he was dodgy.
Yeah.
You know, and to me, people are still trying to debate, is he dodgy or not? Burns actually spotted it and wrote it.
Yeah, years in advance.
Years in advance.
Burns also had a real connection with whiskey, of course, which is why we're here as well. And you have, you know, led the world in barley abrasion, and you have a connection with, I would imagine, John Barleycorn.
Yes, the poem. I think he wrote that early as well. It's about 1782. He wrote John Barleycorn. You know, he adapted it. It's an adapted piece of work. But if you want to read about the whiskey making process, starting with barley, you know, I could have based all my lectures on the same progression.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Because it starts off with the barley growing in the field, being harvested, and being malted, you know, being soaked in water, steeped, being germinated, and being kilned, and then being, you know, mashed and extracted and distilled.
And
now, the point is all in one piece of work.
Yeah, and you helped quicken that process. You found new ways of quickening the malting process, didn't you?
Well, that's right. In fact, it's so simple. What it is that everybody thought when you're making malt, the enzymes came from the germ only. You know, the bit that grew. And my research with Professor MacLeod showed that a lot of the enzymes came from the bran that enclosed the grain. And my work was, if it came from the bran, stimulate the bran as quickly as possible. And that's what we did.
Yeah, and you made that discovery many years ago, decades ago.
Yeah, this was 1968. So again, you know, it's, to me, the Burns is, that poem is the end. There's the end verse. I don't know if you remember it. It says, "Then let us toast John Barleycorn, each man a glass in hand, and let his prosperity never fail in old Scotland."
I know. Superb, superb. Well, look, you're an expert in distilling and brewing, and it's lovely to have you join us. Tell us a little bit about your work as an ambassador for the Robert Burns World Federation as well. What do you do?
Well, I've got a little cough because I've got a bit of COVID.
Oh, do you?
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us if you're not feeling well. Even more. Wow. I hope you're okay.
Well, this is, yeah, it's, some people are worse than I am. So, and I've got a wife that looks after me. So
you're looking very chipper, sir. Don't worry about it.
Thank you very much. Yeah, for the ambassador, one of the events which I did, I went down to Greenock early on, and you know that's where the Burns night concept originated. And we had a celebration of that. And I went down and, you know, met a lot of people, discussed, you know, Burns talked about, you know, his, what we were talking about earlier, his relationship with the West Indies. Well, I still say the West Indies. If I keep saying Jamaica, I'm going to get into trouble. But it was Jamaica, and to show that the man had an international recognition of people. And one of the things that I was pointing out was that if you look at his work, if we just say linked it to slavery, he didn't go. But if you look at his work, he wrote, you know, the Slave's Lament. He also wrote Ode Sacred to the Memory of Mrs. Oswald of Auchencruive. I don't think a lot of people say, well, what's that got to do with slavery? It's just one of the most, shows how much he was on the ball, that Ode Sacred to the Memory of Mrs. Oswald of Auchencruive, Richard Oswald, that's Mr. Oswald, was in Jamaica, went from Glasgow to Jamaica in the 1750s. He was a friend of the Grants of Speyside. And they introduced him to Mary Ramsay. And she had inherited her father's slave plantations. And of course, Oswald, which was not uncommon, maybe Burns wanted to do a bit of that, where he married Mary Ramsay and inherited her plantation and took her plantations. And he then went into the slavery business with the Grants. He came back to Scotland and bought an enormous house in Auchencruive, okay? And that house is still there. And I went and visited it, and they wouldn't let me in.
Wow. And
I did point out, this is my money.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
But the Oswalds lived in Auchencruive. They passed away, and when Mrs. Oswald died, I think Burns was aware of that.
Yes.
And he wrote Ode Sacred to the Memory of Mrs. Oswald in Auchencruive, and in it, there are a couple of lines. There are others that relate to their wealth. But he wrote, and I remember two lines. She was on an annuity of about 10,000 glittering pounds per year. 10,000.
Which would have been a huge amount back then.
Yeah, it's nearly approaching 1 million. But the powerful line of avarice was, she had hands that took, but never gave.
Well,
hands that took, but never gave. And that summed up the slave ownership.
Yeah.
And it is in Burns, one line.